Thank you. So if you knew me as a child, you would not imagine that I could be up on this stage because I was painfully, painfully shy, gawky, awkward, introverted. And my parents tried to do everything to give me a little more courage. They would put me in front of the camera, they would give me dancing lessons, they would even sometimes dress me up as a lion. But it turns out I never got my courage from that or being in front of the camera. Something incredible happened the moment I picked up a camera. It gave me courage. It gave me courage to go out into the world that I was so afraid of and allowed me to take the attention away from myself and literally dive into situations. Here I am making a film about our changing climate in Bangladesh, but it gave me so much courage and self-empowerment. That wasn't the amazing thing I discovered. After telling these stories and working as a photographer for many years, I work for National Geographic now, I realized the more amazing thing about photography is that it is so powerful. Storytelling, imagery can change the world. You know, we can really shine a light and amplify other people's voices. Now, I want to flash back to one of the first stories I ever covered. I was still very much an amateur, and on a whim, I applied for this grant to go to this tiny little country in West Africa called Guinea-Bissau. It was then, and still is today, one of the poorest countries in the world. And much to my delight and sheer horror, I got the grant I applied for. So with a lot of trepidation, I began to pack my bags. I packed 100 rolls of film, my Nikon FM2s, anti-malaria medicine, and an English Poular dictionary. And I got on the plane, and when I landed, I bought 2 huge sacks of rice and 2 chickens, and off I went to the middle of this country. Now, I thought I was going to stay for 2 weeks. Those weeks turned into months. Those months turned into half a year. And what I discovered blew my mind. It was nothing that I had read about. You know, we have 2 narratives about the whole continent of Africa usually in mainstream media, right? On the one hand, you have war, famine, plagues like Ebola. And the other common narrative is you can go and see exotic animals and go on a safari. And what I found was a third narrative. And that narrative was just as true as the others. It was beautiful. It was actually how the majority of people on the planet live. And most people here were so deeply connected to the natural world. I learned so much about this reverence they had for nature. And you know, in those 6 months, I stayed till the end of the dry season, and the food ran out, and all we had were those sacks of rice that I brought with me. And that's where I really learned what hunger feels like. And it changed the way that I see the world. And this is Halima, one of my friends there, and her first baby. And to the women, I was a complete mystery. They said, Amy, how can you be in your early 20s? You're not married, you have no children, and you don't even know how to get water out of the well. Now, has anybody tried to, you know, the women make it look so graceful, the way they carry these huge buckets of water on their head. They're so elegant. Not one drop comes out. But let me tell you how it really is. I would try to get the water to the mud hut where I was living with them. And what happens is the bucket starts to gain velocity, and all of the water ends up on top of you, and you end up about this much water. So they learned to love me. They took care of me despite me being useless, a total mystery to them. And I learned that it really takes time to understand one another's stories. You know, I went to this country almost with a narrative already written in my head, and I think it's a very common thing to do. We all travel and we think we understand a place and a culture and the people. But Guinea-Bissau and all my friends there taught me that it takes time to truly understand one another's stories. But once you do, you're completely transformed. You know, you start to understand this universal truth that we're all so connected and we all want the same things in life. This is Adama taking a swim during the rainy season. And you know, you can look at these pictures and see how different our worlds look from theirs. But that's not the thing that surprised me. The thing that really surprised me was how much we shared, how much we had in common. Actually, our lives were not that different. And this is my friend Alio, who taught me the language Pular. He had the most patience. He also got a hold of my soap. He loved my soap. But Alio and all the children on my last night in Guinea-Bissau were asking me a million questions about my return home to America. Amy, do you have cashews in America? Amy, do you have mangoes in America? And then we're sitting underneath the sea of stars, and there's this big, beautiful full moon up there. And Alio looks up and asks me, Amy, do you have a moon in America? And you know, I think about him every time I see a full moon today. And when you look at the full moon and think about it from its perspective, it's like this collective third eye looking down at us on this planet. And you realize there is this oneness, and that we are all so intricately connected on this planet, whether we understand or believe it. So I left Guinea-Bissau knowing what my mission is as a storyteller. You know, I want to talk about the things that connect us. So for the next 10 years, I actually covered a lot of conflicts, a lot of war, human stories, poverty, issues of security. And after covering those conflicts after conflicts for 10 years, I started to realize this one really important fact, which was all of it, everything, issues of security, issues of health, issues you know, that seem so separate from nature aren't, because everything relies on nature for its outcome. And so even if I'm in my backyard, this is where I live today in Montana, you know, I realize that everything here, and even in this beautiful city of Shanghai, everything comes from nature. Everything we eat, everything we wear, everything in this room. And I start to understand how important that is. And now I'm going to flash back to 2009. This was the story that changed my life, changed the trajectory of my work. It stopped me in my tracks because I was so focused on humanity. And then my friends in the Czech Republic called me and said, Amy, we have this story about 4 of the world's last northern white rhinos alive on the planet. We are flying them from this zoo in the Czech Republic back to Africa in this last-ditch effort to save an entire species. Because at the time, there were only 8 of them alive on the planet. 8, all in zoos. They had survived. I mean, look at them. They look ancient. They've been around this planet for millions of years. But they couldn't survive us. So I flew with them on a cold, snowy night in this town surrounded by smokestacks in a foreign environment and flew with them back to Africa. And this is what we imagine wildlife roaming the open plains of Africa looks like. But this is actually what it looks like today. These animals have to be guarded around the clock 24/7 by heavily militarized men because the value of their horns are worth more than gold right now. And we all know that the material in their horns is just keratin. It's the same thing in our fingernails. And just almost 2 months ago, I got a call from my friends in Kenya, and they said, hurry, Amy, Sudan, this rhino that I had known for the last 9 years is going to die tomorrow. Please come. So I got on a plane to say goodbye to Sudan. He was the last living male northern white rhino on the planet. Today, there's only 2 of them. And here is Joseph saying goodbye. And he was surrounded by all the people that loved him. They were all crying. This was the last moment when one of the keepers from the Czech Republic came and held him on his last breath. And this is Zachariah and all of the keepers mourning because they spent so much time with these rhinos. They fell in love with them. They actually spent more time with them than their own children. And they understood how connected we all are. And it was heartbreaking, that moment. But I think that we have to see Sudan as a wake-up call for all of us. You know, this is our chance to change the destiny now for all of us. Because on a planet of 7 billion people, we must start to see ourselves as a part of the landscape, not something separate from it. Because once you start to understand it, you realize that our fate as humanity, is so intricately connected with all of these animals. When they disappear, so do we. And this next picture is really gruesome and hard to look at. But this is what extinction looks like, and it is happening on our watch today. And not just for the rhino and the elephants here, but a whole host of other species that we may think we have nothing in common with. But we'll soon realize that, again, you know, our fate is so linked to them. And as I started getting into this story 9 years ago, I realized that all the attention was focused on the militarization, arming guys with guns, protecting from the poaching. But one piece of the story was always left out, and that was the people living with the wildlife. They actually hold the key to saving what's left. And it turns out, you know, they are nature's great protectors. And this is a man named Yusuf with 3 black baby rhinos. It's another species. They were orphaned, and he sleeps with them and protects them and risks his own life. And then this is a group of Samburu men who've never seen a rhinoceros in their life. Like all these tourists come to see wildlife in Africa, but can you imagine the people living right side by side have never seen them because they've become locally extinct. They're only in a few pockets in these parts in northern Kenya. And their big dream is to bring the rhinos back. And you know, I think that as we go forward, we have to talk about the challenges we face on this planet. But we also must talk about the solutions. What are the solutions? Well, I think it's these indigenous communities. This is Kamara and Khalifi, a baby black rhino that he has raised since it was 1 day old. You know, these are the real heroes out there. And now I want to share a story with you. This is a story I've been working on for the last 1.5 years, also in northern Kenya. And 25 years ago, there was no wildlife here. They had been poached to extinction. It was just decimated the landscape. And the people were suffering too, because once you lose these great keystone species, everything else starts to die. We're in this intricate ecosystem, and you take one thing out, nothing survives. Elephants are nature's great engineers because they rip up the trees, which allows grass to grow, and then a whole host of other animals survive. And ultimately, all of us too. The people need the grass. So this is the best story of all. These Samburu, a local community who really had nothing. Their big dream was to become the elephants' great protectors. And when elephants were poached and babies were orphaned, the babies were going to Nairobi and never returning back to their own landscape. And now, against all odds, a minor miracle is happening. This community that once was really afraid of elephants are now taking care of them. And sometimes the babies fall into the wells because we have climate change and the wells get deeper and deeper. And this is a story. I happened to be there during one of the rescues, and today everybody in Kenya has a cell phone, so they knew who to call. They called this elephant sanctuary. We went and we waited for the mother to come back, but she never did. So eventually we brought her back to the sanctuary. And eventually, these elephants will be returned back to the wild, and the great hope is that they'll reunite with their own families again. And elephants are incredibly smart. They have the biggest brain of mammals, and you can really see how intelligent they are. And the other piece of the story, which I love, is this is Mary. She is one of the first female keepers in all of Africa, because women in the past were never allowed to be elephant keepers in these sanctuaries. But today, the women are playing a much greater role. And it's having these ripple effects in the whole community, because once the women are empowered with these roles, the way people view them is much different. And so there's a lot more respect for their role. And if you look at this story, it really looks like a story about elephants and wildlife, but it's not. It's actually a story about all of us, about our world, about where we're going in our future. And I love it because it's one community with very little, no money, no power, changing the destiny of their future. And I just want to show you some, not everybody can go to Kenya, so I'm also using every medium I can to tell these stories. But I want to wrap up with one of my favorite stories, a story familiar to all of you, I'm sure. I was invited to be part of the film crew that was photographing Hope, the first female panda that was being sent back to the wild. And I wanted to be empathetic to her. Look at her, she looks scared, leaving home forever. So I dressed up as a tree so Hope wouldn't see me. And the head of the program, Dr. Zhang Hemin, also affectionately called Papa Panda, saw me in this tree costume and came up, gave me a hug, and said, "You are going to get to hold 2 baby pandas. Thank you for thinking about Hope." President Obama, he only held 1. So not only did I get to hold 2 baby pandas, I got to see their whole bumper crop of babies laid out. And I knew then that I had my in. I wanted to do a story for National Geographic. So immediately I went back to the magazine and said, I have access to this incredible story. And guess what? National Geographic said, no, thank you. We did a story 8 years ago. And in National Geographic time, 8 years is like yesterday. So I had to convince them. That was really my job as a journalist, is convincing them how I was going to make this story special and different. And so I read everything I could about pandas. This is Zhang Hemin with all the babies. But I literally read so much, started to just feel like I was thinking like a panda bear. And what I discovered was so fascinating. These bears, which we see everywhere now, they're almost like turned into a kind of a clownish toy figure. They're actually these mythical, ancient species that have been around the planet for 8 million years. And if you can imagine, the first one was captured alive only in 1936. Not that long. They were so elusive, they would hide up in these thick bamboo forests away from humanity, and nobody knew very few people knew they even existed for a long time. And this is what they look like when they're born: tiny, blind, helpless, 1/900th the size of their mother, and then they grow like little bamboo shoots before your eyes. They're one of the fastest growing mammals on the planet. They're adorable, right? They smell like little wet puppy dogs, if you're wondering. But the best part of this story is not that they're just being bred in captivity so that they, are basically can survive extinction in captivity if they go extinct in the wild. The greatest thing that's happening here in China is that they're releasing them back into the wild. And so part of this means that the pandas should never be comfortable around humanity, which means all of us, the scientists, the keepers, even myself, had to dress up in these panda costumes so they never would become comfortable with us. And as we all know, pandas go by scent, not sight. So these costumes were also scented with panda urine. And the amazing thing about this story, though, is that the panda has actually been delisted on the endangered species list. China is performing a minor miracle. And the biggest issue is habitat. Habitat is the most important thing all over the planet. How are we going to create space for all these wild animals to coexist with us? And, you know, I think that nature is incredibly resilient if we give it a chance. But for me, the big question is, you know, we can save pandas, but we also have to save all the endangered species, all the animals, and all of us, ultimately. So I just want to end with, you know, this idea that in a world of 7 billion people, what are you going to do? You know, how are you going to change your own life, your own communities, and use your, you know, your creativity to make an impact for a world where we can all coexist? And I believe that it first starts with falling in love, you know, because if we fall in love, then we care. And if we care, we have the courage and creativity to dream of a world, you know, of a world we all want to live in, and for our children too. So thank you so much.